So back to it. So this is going to be maybe a bit shorter than the usual presentation we do, but it's going to be this format for term 3 because we all have exams. I don't think people have a lot of time. So this is going to be the Axios npm supply chain attack, which happened very recently in March. And for the next lecture, I leave you guys to give me suggestions. I'll take a look at it and I'll make up the slides this week. This also means that I'm not as informed on the subject as I would have been on the others, because I will probably, I maybe have a little bit of knowledge of the vulnerabilities, but I will discover them this week while making the slides. So why poison the cooked dish when you have access to the raw ingredients? So why did I put this here? Because it's a supply chain attack. So you'll see supply chain attacks are now becoming way more popular than before, and it's due to a lot of factors. So let's get straight into it. What are supply chain attacks? So the definition from NCSC is supply chain attack extends the network of trading relationships relied upon to deliver products, systems, and services. So what does that mean, basically? That means that you have, instead of attacking the end product, instead of attacking an employee's computer, you will attack when the computer is being made. So you will attack before it's actually in the end user's hand. Why is that better? Because nowadays, there's way more security on the end product than there is when the product is created or put together. So there is most of the time, when you let's take an example of a computer. When you put together a computer, you need to make the chip, you need to solder components on it, then you have to build the case, then you have to put an OS on it. So a lot of different components come together for the end user to have it. But when the end user has it, most of the time it's much more hardened than the initial process. So does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, perfect. So this, especially in this case, was targeted because the supply chain attack was a public repository, something that is open source. So a lot of people are able to collaborate on it for free, and a lot of people will watch what is going on. But this software, this library, was used in thousands of dependencies. So what that means is if you manage to affect this initial repo, you can affect everything that's after, which is really, really useful because what is after might be more secure than this initial repo. So it exploits what we call trust relationships, and it's really easy to scale, which is really what we want when we try to hack something. Hard to detect because it's an initial process. If we take the example of a computer again, if I solder something differently on your chip, you'll probably not notice it straight away. But if I try to hack your computer, there's going to be new processes that you will probably notice way quicker than something soldered differently. So that's the whole process here. You exploit something that is trusted, a third-party component, instead of attacking the target directly. So why they are more relevant now? And something that is very important is this. So this was published in 2021. So that means that 5 years ago, it was already a growing concern. So really, really important. So why is it more relevant? Because we use way more open source now. Some people say open source is actually the future, and closed source will soon be off because people have way harder capacity to trust now and really, really want to know what is the intricate processes. So open source is probably going to be who am I to say that? But open source is what people have a tendency to push towards nowadays. Now, there is a transitive dependency risk when you attack supply chain. That means that when you attack something, this will probably be used by other components, and this attack will transfer to the other components that are also used. Okay, perfect. And there are also something what we call CI/CD. So CI/CD stands for continuous integration and continuous development. So this means that if you work with GitHub Actions, you can automatically update your repo once you change your code instead of having to push it again on your deploy. So for example, on Vercel, instead of having to change your code, then push your new version to Vercel, you can set up a GitHub action that does it automatically. Very nice because automation quicker, but automation less control as well. So this is why it's also painful when you have a supply chain attack, because you attack at the start, and if it's pushed automatically, no time to react, no time to verify, it's automatically updated and propagated into production as said here. So nowadays, this is mostly in the case of open source repos and on GitHub. You have some people that are called maintainers that have access to repositories. These are the kinds of bosses of the repository. These are the guys that check the pushes, the new branches, that select what issues they're going to solve next. These are guys that overview the repo, and they most of the time have a lot of experience and a lot of time working with these specific libraries or software. And it impacts a lot of people when you attack supply chain, definitely because you attack the start process, and it will probably propagate a lot later on, most of the time. So a bit more on this attack specifically. So what is Axios? Axios is a promise-based HTTP client for browser and Node.js. So I don't know why it's written 2 times, sorry about that. But what you need to remember for this slide mostly is that there are 101 million downloads per week. So isn't that crazy? 101 million downloads a week. I do not notice the numbers, so I might be saying something that is not correct. But I would think it's within the top packets, top downloads, and definitely something that a lot of software rely on. So this makes it a prime target, because if something is heavily relied on by other software, if you affect it, you affect everything else. Supply chain attacks. So they release around 2 to 5 versions a month. So releasing a new version that is probably not consistent or that has been hacked wouldn't make a big difference. If they released a version every 3 months, releasing a version, straight away people will look at the code and watch every new points, every new code and everything. So if they release 2 to 5, there's going to be less people that will watch and think it's normal, which is, again, prime target. And it has 175,995 dependence package. So this number of package depend on the Axios libraries to also build themselves. And you will see that the hackers thought about that and made a RAT, so remote access Trojan, that also affects the dependent packages, which is wonderful in the case of a supply chain attack. They also support all the browsers. So what the initial sentence when I said promise-based HTTP client, it doesn't mean a lot. What that means is you probably use it to do API requests or talk and make HTTP or HTTPS requests. Anything that you will try to fetch when using Node.js, you'll probably use by Axios. I personally used Axios in a few of my projects, so when I saw that, I was not happy. But you'll see it's not too bad. So who was the threat actor? Who wanted to hack Axios? It's some people. So again, this is what we have as knowledge right now. This is a recent attack. Maybe in the next weeks, months, we'll see that it's not actually them. We just know quite at 90% sure that it's a North Korean state actor. It's been associated with Sapphire Sleet, which is part of the APT38. So APT38 and APT37s are North Korean hackers, but they have different intent. So APT38 here, if they focus on finance, crypto, venture capital, so they want to make money. APT37 will focus mostly on other government bodies, so trying to hack the United States, trying to hack maybe China, South Korea, things like that. So they were way more financially targeted. They are also known as with other names, so Nickel Gladstone, Beagle's Boys, Blue North, Standard Scroll, I don't know how you pronounce it, but they have a lot of names, and that's also a reason why we cannot say that it's Sapphire Sleet for sure. But we know it's mostly going to be APT38 due to their motives and the way they code. There are patterns in the way APT code, and this is a way that we identify them as well. But they also have other names, so Bureau 121 that you might have heard of, Hidden Cobra, and APT37, and I mean, there are a lot of threat actors, yes.
What kind of patterns do you have?
It can vary, but they have variable naming patterns. So sometimes they will name a variable in a different way that other groups would. They have different signing algorithms for what they do, or when they use algorithms. So, for example, when it's the US hackers, most of the time it's associated with using quantum safe algorithms in some cases. And because these patterns are known, some state actors and some threat actors try to mimicate these patterns to make people think that they are someone else. But at the end of the day, you can also check their time, but sometimes they use VPN to put them in a different country, modify the time zone to make it appear like they're someone else. So it's very complicated to determine who it actually is, but they always leave traces. And this is what people follow. So how did the attack happen? So this is a mix of a lot of things that we did see this year. Firstly, it was phishing. So What they did is they identified the lead maintainer, and with this lead maintainer, they did a bit of social engineering. They made a fake Slack workspace, made a false team call, and then they scheduled a call with this maintainer saying they wanted to contribute. They said they were a founder of a company and they wanted to really contribute to this repo some way or another. And this is the part that I'm not too clear about, but they managed to have a pop-up spawn when they were in the meeting with him. So the guy got a pop-up saying his version of his computer or software wasn't up to date. He updated this and he got a remote access Trojan to his computer straight away. So that means they had remote control on his computer initially, but just the maintainer. So that was firstly a phishing attack, then they used remote access and they got access to his account, GitHub account as well, which is starting to be painful, but not too bad at this point. Then they take over his npm account, starting to get quite complicated because Axios is deployed with npm, which is it's like apt on Linux, or it's a packet manager, so it's one of the big ones as well. So with this, they changed his email. His initial email was something else. They changed it to receive the confirmation numbers and everything on another email. You'll see this has quite an importance in retracing the steps after. Then, before starting everything, they released a library called Plain Crypto. So this Plain Crypto library was a fake library that they published in advance and that they intended to use on the Axios malicious version to deploy their malware. Because if they coded their malware straight into the Axios malicious Axios versions, people would have noticed. It has 100 million downloads a week. Definitely some people are going to be more interested in others and going to scan every line of code. So the best way to do that is use a third-party dependency, which is nice. So that's what they did. And then they started to build trust. So they make a clean version first, then they make a malicious version of this Plain Crypto. And it looks like a proper GitHub repository with a proper GitHub library because they have good commits, new versions, and everything like that. So if we continue, one thing to note is they made a dropper in the Plain Crypto. Dropper is something that you will use to get your payload. It's, because if you send your payload straight away, probably antivirus will notice. So what you do is you put like a little guy saying, hello, I'm here. And this little guy goes, gets the big payload and brings everything once he's already on your machine, which really reduces the detection and reduces the size of the payload. And so once this was done, straight away, they went and they released 2 new versions of Axios with the malicious npm, so with the account of the maintainers they had taken before. So why 2 versions? One tagged as new and one tagged as legacy. So sorry, one tagged as latest, one tagged as legacy. So this made sure that everyone that auto-updated Axios library would pull this. Some people used legacy because they have retro compatibility. Some people use latest because latest features. So they knew everyone would have to use this if they did an auto-update. And then they use the post-install setup.js. So this is where everything gets together. So they have the new malicious version. The people pull this without even knowing it, because as we said today, automation is everywhere. So people just have an auto-update, post-install, boom. Something called setup.js did release this remote access Trojan and self-deletes. Remove the traces at the end, which is quite good because you cannot really understand the state of the attack and how it happened. And this version, this malicious remote access Trojan, I mean, it's always malicious, but was compatible with every versions. So Windows, Mac, and Linux. So they did a different remote access for each version. Firstly, Macro for Mac, which is an executable format for Macs. Then PE, which is an executable format for Windows. But for Linux, they did ELF, which is also an executable format, but they did it in Python, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe it's Windows they did in Python. But one of them was made in Python, one of them was in Bash, and I think the other was different. But anyways, so they released a version for each operating system to make sure everybody would be targeted. So a bit more detail, exactly what we said before. Someone posed a legitimate company founder. They contacted the maintainer. His name was Jason Siam. I think he still is the maintainer. They invited him to a fake Slack workspace, so really made everything professional. They made realistic channels, Teams members, so they really made it as real as possible. Then they called him, and they said, like you would probably do with someone that you want to collaborate with. And during this, they prompted him to install a fix on something that some people say pop-up, some people say something else, but we just know he clicked on something he shouldn't have clicked on, but there was no way he could have known that they were malicious. So that's what happened. Then he got a remote access Trojan. They got full access of this machine, and that's it. One point to note here, it was not a mass phishing campaign like you would do normally, send a lot of emails, hello, I need some money, but my family is in trouble or something like that. No, it was really targeted to one person. If it didn't work, they would have never gotten control of Axios, or maybe another way, but because he was a lead maintainer, it was the best way to do it. If it didn't work, he would have alerted other people, and probably they would have taken 1 or 2 more years to figure out a plan to tackle another dependency. So this was really, really fought from zero, and it took a really long time to do it. So then what happened? So they were on his computer already, and then they extracted his npm credentials, and they modified his email, and they took his npm access token, which was nice because once they have all this, they can push a new version without any issues. They changed his email, so from his normal email to a Proton mail, so they could push and they could get all the MFA codes and everything there, which is very nice. And they created a separate account to publish the malicious dependency, plain crypto. So because if the same email published the dependency, the link would be made straight away. So they thought about this as well and created a different account to publish plain crypto, which is the malicious dependency. So they released, as we said before, the 2 versions of plain crypto. The first one is clean, and the second one was a bit bad and had a dropper in this.
Can you explain why it was first clean and then bad?
Because most probably it would be like this, so to build historical context of a repo. Because if they pushed a malicious code straight away, you know, one push malicious straight away, way more. How to say it in English? Way less
conspicuous.
Yeah, something. Yeah, exactly. So you know, they would be like, oh, it's very suspicious. There's only one version. This guy added this dependency. They check this one version, and they'll be like, oh, okay, it's malicious. But if there are more, it seems way more legitimate than it could with you know, only one version. I mean, 2 version is very minimalistic. If you really want to do it very properly, you probably do this on a scale of 1 year before, especially on the scale of attack. You start building this repository 1 year before. You do very, very legitimate commits. You do 1 malicious commit, then you continue doing legitimate commits, and you hide it in the middle.
So what would be the difference if they kept going? Like, it would just take longer to discover it, is that it?
Yes, but if you see the timestamp, it was a few hours before. So they didn't. It was not a month before. They probably didn't expect the Axios lead maintainer to actually fall in the trap and they get a remote access Trojan. And they knew as soon as they get access, it's a matter of hours or days before they discover this access. So they have to act very, very fast. So yeah, this might be one of the big mistakes they did, is they didn't hide it as good as they should have if they wanted it to be persistent. So then they pushed the vulnerable code. So I put this chill guy meme here because they were chill. They had no issues at this point. So they directly publish it via CLI, which is very, very important because normally it's pushed via, they pushed it via GitHub Web Interface normally, and this time it was pushed via CLI, which is something you can see in the historical context. So this was already a big difference between the usual pushed and the malicious push. So they bypassed the GitHub Actions, all the trusted pipelines, and because they pushed it directly via npm and not on the repo straight away, and then they didn't use any tags or any release. So it's really they hid it as much as possible and made it as quick as possible. So they released their 2 malicious versions, the latest and the legacy, as we said before, that depended on plain crypto, which was the malicious dependency. So these versions are in themselves, if they didn't have this library, were perfectly clean, but this is the point that really was used to make this malicious. So there is something to note here as well. There is a collaborator, and there is the community that flagged this attack a few minutes, a few hours after. Straight away, people said, oh, this is using a dependency that is malicious, and because they had access to the lead maintainer's account, they deleted these callouts. They were like waiting for this, and they deleted everything straight when people, when whistleblowers said, "Oh, this is malicious," they deleted the report straight away to keep this as soon as possible. But this is the equivalent of patching holes in a boat that's sinking. So they knew they were getting detected. They knew it was a matter of when they started releasing the hours, and then they were just trying to keep it as long as possible to get as much infections as possible. So they deleted the disclosure issues. And then they were waiting, because once this was done, they didn't have anything else to do. They just waited, and the post-install lifecycle hook. So this is very important. This is the thing that fetches the automatic install, and this is what got this Axios vulnerable version on the computers. So we have to know that this malicious version stayed for 3 hours, around 3 hours publicly, before it was actually removed, and before they took out the lead maintainer's access and everything. So 3 hours was enough to infect a lot of machines. So malicious codes executes within 2 seconds of the install. It's worth noting, because they don't wait for anything else. The setup.js dropper checks the OS, downloads the proper remote access Trojan for the OS. So it was nicely made code, and there is an anti-forensic cleanup, which is very important, because that's what enables the researcher to reverse engineer this malware. So the dropper gets the payload and then deletes himself and replaces the package JSON with a clean copy without showing the plain crypto dependency. So there's no evidence in the node modules. As we said, so that's why I said it was Python based on Linux, which is very weird considering they did Mac-O and PE binaries on Windows. I would expect them to do ELF on Linux. I don't know why the graph said ELF, so don't quote me on that. Maybe it's ELF, maybe it's Python. We shall see. But anyway, they all share the exact same C2. C2 is because normally when you have a malware, you have it returned to a C2, which is command and control, which is a sort of interface where the people would monitor who got infected and who was not infected. So then they can start launching controls from there. So more or less, it's their command console, where they're like, oh, we got 1,000 people that are now sending back signals up to us, so they're infected. So that's a C2, command and control.
And CGP use legitimate?
Yes. There's open source C2 such as Silver, if I'm not mistaken, and Cobalt Strike is a very known C2, but is not cheap. But I think if you want a project, you can work in designing your own C2. It's not illegal, as long as you don't use it to do anything illegal. But it's a very good, cool project where you monitor you can do it, for example, in a DDoS. DDoS, distributed denial of service. If you have the D before DDoS, means it's distributed, so you have a lot of bots that will send this. So to manage your bot, you can do it from a C2 console as well. So and then once we were at trust the process, and now people were starting to get this vulnerable version, and they were starting to get infected. So this is the important part. Every 60 seconds, it send back a beacon, so it transmits a lot of stuff saying, I infected this machine, I'm awaiting your commands, what can I do? So every 60 seconds, they send back their message to the attacker saying, hey, this target has been infected, basically. So immediate on every compromised host, and straight away there was enumeration on the user directories, the file system routes, list the running processes, and harvest the environment variables if there were anything critical here. So straight away, this was not, they weren't waiting for any commands, this was done straight away. And then after, if they wanted, so in the environment variables, and what they really targeted were the npm tokens, Amazon Web Service access keys, SSH private keys, cloud credentials, CI/CD secrets, so continuous integration and continuous development, everything stored in environment variables. So what they really wanted is extracting the tokens and getting access to what the people had initially in their machines. Because this was deployed to such a large audience, and it was automatically pulled by some computers and some servers. What they really wanted is gaining access into bigger enterprise and bigger environments. So with this, they could do it very, very nicely. So beyond recon, they really could do anything. They had remote shell control. They could inject binaries, exfiltrate files, see everything that was going on your machine. It was a remote access Trojan. They had full control, but it wasn't launched automatically. what was initially done automatically was token harvesting and everything. So simplified timeline, then after we'll see the official GitHub timeline. But the simplified timeline just says, so we really look at the time. So initially, one day before, they publish, there was a legitimate version published by the real maintainer. And then a bit later, there was another legitimate version. So you see when it starts with a 0, most of the time is the legacy version. And when it starts with a 1, it would be the latest version. So very important, it was published via GitHub Action, OICDC, so it was the usual way of pushing. Then the plain crypto library was published by some NRWise Proton, which is probably not his name or anything related to him. So clean decoy, then they publish the malicious version, and then they publish from the compromised account, and they tag that latest and legacy, so same as the 2 versions that was released a bit before, but this time they were malicious. So if we want to go a bit more in detail and really understand what happens, the first, so it's exactly the same, but this time you do get better timeline, and you do get the community members that are starting to file issues, and they were deleted by the attackers. So this is really important to see. The version was released around midnight 21 and around 1, so this is around, we don't really know, but let's say less than an hour later, people started flagging the version already.
How did they know?
When you have such a big repository, every version that you release is thoroughly scanned by a lot of passionate people and people that really depend on these versions. So, you know, there are really people that when there's a new version, or people that might be implicated in this repo that did release versions, they check. And they're like, oh, I wonder was this new version added? Check, oh, plain crypto, okay, let's see what plain crypto is. And if you F12, you know, on VS Code, or if you go and dig a bit deeper on the GitHub repo, look at this. Probably did a lot of obfuscation, but obfuscation is always not a very good sign. You know, when you see something, a lot of underscores, bitwise macros, things like that, you're like, oh, why is it here? Why is it not written very nicely? Then you start asking more questions, and then it took less than an hour for people to start to flag this. And then the first collaborator, which is the Digital Brain GS, opened a PR, said add deprecated. So I took a look at this PR. It mostly says this version is malicious. Please block the access. And he contacted npm directly. So that's where he escalated things, because he saw that the lead maintainer was probably corrupted. And then only 3 hours later, they removed the malicious version from npm, and they removed the plain crypto.js from npm as well. So it took 3 hours, more or less. Maybe a bit less for it to be detected. But imagine something that is automatically downloaded by a lot of machines, and it took 2 seconds once it was downloaded to launch the malicious code. Definitely gives you time to do whatever you want. So what was the damage? We still don't really know, because it's been quite recent. And when you get infected, as a big company, you probably don't report it straight to anyone, because it does affect your reputation, and reputation is very important for companies, more than security, sadly. But so they got persistent remote access to infected machines. They were able to execute commands. They got the credentials, the tokens, and everything they wanted. These are the versions, as we said before, that were affected. And we say hundreds of thousands of secrets potentially compromised in 3 hours. But everything is very speculative. We don't really know. But it has a really big impact, because if you pulled this version and you want it to be the most up-to-date as possible, you actually give your machines up to attackers. And most enterprise systems do want to be as updated as possible. So big problem. So what do you need to take away from this attack? So a lead maintainer account was compromised, and this was all it took to release malicious versions. When these versions were released, then malicious JavaScript did a stage 2 implant, so a dropper that fetches a payload. That's mostly it. And then so same RAT, same remote access Trojan, but so identical protocols adapted for different operating systems. And it was written so PowerShell Windows to so here it says Python Linux again, so I would think it's Python, but before we said ELF, now we say PowerShell.
I think
not PowerShell, sorry.
I think it might be
a setup script, which was stager.
I don't know.
versus the actual
You'll see, I pulled this from so many sources, and everybody says different things. So, and it's not too hard, but I think because the old versions were deleted, there's no real way to see what was going on, except if people way back machine. But I don't think anyone archived anything in.
Why did they save that? Why did they save it?
No, probably not. So we don't. I don't really know. I just know it was C++ for Mac OS, and it does seem to be Python for Linux, which was then converted to an ELF. Probably PowerShell Windows or maybe a PE. Anyway, it doesn't matter. What you really need to take off is it was OS specific. What they thought about this, and they didn't want to infect only one type of OS. Windows are very prominent everywhere on personal computers, but Linux are very prominent on servers. So they didn't only target servers or users, they targeted everyone. And macOS also very prominent in actual end users. So they really wanted everyone. And then anti-forensic cleanup, which is very, very smart. So final cleanup to make sure that no one's able to see everything if they had it on their system, and make it very difficult for forensics later on. So similar attacks, if you really want to learn more into supply chain attacks, SolarWind, which is quite a famous one, and then event stream npm incident, so again npm, because it's a very known distributor, Code Cove breach in 2021, and 3CX supply chain attack in 2023. Don't ask me too much details about them. I am not on point on this. So if you want the sources, and here is some. No, usually I skip over this quite quickly, but there is really one that I enjoyed a lot. Is this one, if I'm not mistaken? Yeah, this one will resume this attack. Probably the best, and give you the best overview on how this actually happened. So you'll see if you scroll down, and you'll see I did take some screenshots from this, such as this timeline here or affected packages. But yeah, you'll have the whole analysis and everything here if you are interested in that. So that's it for Axios npm attack, supply chain attack, and actually took longer than I expected.